graduate school, and undergraduate school at night to take some courses, and then ended up changing careers and became eventually a clinical psychologist. I'd say that also something that would be 3 out of the 5 would be the birth of my 3 children. Having been able to be there for that has had a profound impact on my life. Really has added a lot of meaning to my life, as it does, I think, for many parents. And I think another thing I would cite was way back in 1989. Seems like, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that I was invited to develop a 12-step intervention for a major national research project, still the largest psychotherapy study or clinical trial ever conducted, called Project Match. And I was invited to develop a 12-step intervention to be included in that study, along with cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational enhancement therapy. And that was also a turning point in my life. I was very fortunate to be asked to do that. And I have been involved in clinical trials and research from a 12-step model ever since, for all these years.
Mm. So talk to me about that 12-step intervention you talked about. I mean, what is it? What does it entail?
Well, at the time back then, there was not any real research, any good research on AA. And the prevailing bias in the professional community and among researchers was either skeptical, or that it really didn't work, or they really didn't understand it. A lot of people thought it was cultish kind of thing. Mm. And there was no good clinical trials. Research centers tended to focus on something like cognitive behavioral therapy, and they would do what we call clinical trials. They'd assign people randomly to one treatment or another, and then see how they did. But there was really no 12-step oriented treatment at that time. So I developed a 12-step oriented intervention, which is a therapy. It's delivered by therapists, and its goal is to educate their clients about AA, to coach them about AA, to help work through the common resistances that there are to AA. And so we set forth to do that. And it was a major research study, involving 9 sites throughout the country. So that's the goals of it, is to educate, coach, work through resistance. There's what we call a core program, and there's an elective program. So it's a manual guided treatment that follows a specific structure for sessions. And there's a particular content that the therapist covers in each session. Although, depending on circumstances, they can repeat that content over, several different sessions. But they follow the structure, which begins with reviewing what the person already done in the preceding week. Some new material could be about acceptance. It could be about emotions. It could be about building a lifestyle contract. And then each session ends with what we call recovery tasks, where the therapist actually sets some expectations for clients for what he or she would like to see them do between now and the next session. So that's sort of an overview of 12-step facilitation.
Interesting. Can you talk to Dr. Joe about what you believe the resistance is to 12-step programs?
Well, a lot of it is basically not understanding it, or prejudice. If you're probably aware that there are a lot of skeptics of AA out there. They're on the internet all the time, talking about how it's a religion, how it's a cult, how it doesn't help people. Usually those are either people who personally had a bad experience, which is possible. But I always say that, people can also have a bad experience in psychotherapy. That's not so uncommon. So they might have a bad experience, or they may be basically biased because of what they see on social media. Or it could be somebody who's just selling something else. they're really criticizing AA because they have something else they want to market, another approach they want to market. And that's pretty common. But a lot of times when you start digging down, if you would Google these other approaches, you'll find that there's not really much research to support them. Whereas now there is a lot of research to support the 12-step model.
Mm.
Do you suffer from alcoholism or addiction, Dr. Joe?
Suffer from Alcoholics Anonymous addiction?
Or addiction, yes.
No.
Okay. When we've done some research, obviously, on AA. What would you say, if any, because we're still early with the treatment centers, are the success rates of Alcoholics Anonymous compared to a treatment center?
Well, that's very interesting because, again, the critics, by the way, to answer your question, even though I'm not in recovery myself, there's quite a bit of addiction in my family history, which is actually sort of what motivated me in some way, I think, to get involved in this. But to answer your question, some of the critics, there are some critics out there who said that AA actually harms 98% of the people who try it. And so a recent, something called the Cochrane report came out in March of 2020. You can Google Cochrane reports and you can look it up on compared AA and 12-step facilitation combined, because what they looked at were clinical trials that utilized 12-step facilitation plus AA, obviously, to something else like cognitive behavioral therapy. And they concluded that the TSF AA combination is much more effective at promoting long-term recovery than, say, cognitive behavioral therapy. In my book, If You Work It, It Works, I summarize a lot of studies that have been done. So I'll give you one example. One study out of Stanford University followed a group of people who initially made a choice that decided that they wanted to go to AA but not therapy. Another group decided they wanted AA plus therapy, and another group decided they wanted therapy without AA, and they followed them for 16 years. And what they found was the best outcome was associated with those who chose AA plus therapy. Interestingly, they also found if anyone who stopped going to AA, even over 16 years, was more likely to start drinking again. Another study found that they studied a group for 7 years and found that those who consistently went to about 50 to 60 meetings a year were still sober. About 70% of those people were still sober 7 years later, which is pretty dramatic.
Yeah, that is dramatic. I mean, considering that AA is still classified as the #1 reason to support alcoholics and even addicts for that matter. Mm-hmm. So your book, If You Work It, It Works. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about, that's the atypical saying when we go to an AA meeting is if you work it, it works.
Right.
Talk to me about what is inside that book that allows people to bring them in to understand how it works if you work.
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that, because the origin of that book has to do with the fact that I've been involved and aware of this research for many years now, and I've consulted to a number of these clinical trials, training therapists, supervising them, designing, modifying, tweaking 12-step facilitation in little ways. But my editor, an editor I had, pointed out to me that a lot of the research that is out there that supports AA is really kind of buried, if you will, in professional journals. It tends to be published by researchers in professional journals, peer-reviewed journals. Most people don't have access to those. Very expensive. They're mostly institutional access. And secondly, if you don't have a PhD, it can be very hard to interpret any of those studies. Mm-hmm. So what we decided to do was that since I had collected a large volume of this research, the goal was to take that, organize it, the average reader could understand. Okay, so it talks about the study I just mentioned, talks about what happened with those people over 16 years. It's part of it talks about it's divided into chapters, which include what we know about AA, what we know about the role of emotions in supporting recovery versus relapse, what we know about how does, say, alcohol or drug affect the brain, how does it affect cognitive functioning. So we know, for example, that 30 to 40% of people who enter rehab, when they did some testing, found that they had mild cognitive impairment. Now that's significant because it means when somebody's going into rehab, their thinking is affected. It's not as clear as it would have been, before they became addicted, which could play a major role in whether they're able to follow, get as much as they could out of AA. We know that people drop out of AA, that's for sure, just like they drop out of counseling. But the research on the neurology of addiction suggests that maybe one of the reasons is that they do have some mild cognitive impairment and they can't really get as much out of the meetings as they might. So they leave, as opposed to, say, in 12-step facilitation, where they're working with a therapist to help guide them into utilizing AA. So the book is divided into all those different categories and summarizes that research in a way that the average reader, the average person who wants to give AA a try, could pick up that book and become informed about what we really know about AA.
Mm.
I love that. Absolutely. Guys, Dr. Joe is on the show. Stick around. We'll be right back after this. Hey guys, welcome back. This is Recovery Channel Podcast. My name is Dr. Robb Kelly, the addiction doctor, along with Jennifer Lovely. Dr. Joe Nowinski is on the show today talking about alcoholism, addiction, Alcoholics Anonymous, which is interesting. Talk to me, Dr. Joe, if you could, about what's the key to recovery after rehab? Once somebody comes out, I mean, what do they do then? What's that key?
Well, that's actually the subject of my new book coming out next June. It's called Recovery After Rehab. And having worked for many years, as you probably know, as I said, the treatment aspect of addiction, alcohol, and drug abuse, I've always been interested in what happens after rehab. And the starting point for the book is actually, there's an old nautical term called point of departure. And what it refers to is where a ship is located, the port where a ship is, before it sets forth on a long journey over open water. And that's how I think about rehab. Rehab is kind of a point of departure for somebody. They go into treatment, they go into residential care, they get sober, they leave with some tools, but that's their point of departure. And what happens next is really critical, especially of the next year after they leave. And in my book, I sort of conceptualize it this way, that recovery is primarily the responsibility of the individual, okay, who has the addiction and goes into treatment. But that person's loved ones are also stakeholders from my point of view. They are stakeholders in recovery. Too often I've heard from people say that their loved one went into rehab or treatment. They really don't know much about what went on in there, and they really weren't involved in it. They were basically almost told that either they were enablers or they were codependent, and that basically what they needed to do is just stand back, stay away, and let the addict take responsibility. In my book, the addict has the primary responsibility, but I look at stakeholders, loved ones, as equally involved, and that it really should be a collaborative effort. So we really go into everything from starting at the very beginning, that when someone leaves rehab, what are they thinking? What are they really thinking? Are they really convinced that they need to abstain from alcohol and drugs? because there's a difference between saying it and believing it. So that's one thing, that some people still leave rehab ambivalent. They start to think, well, maybe I could have one. Maybe I can't use cocaine, but I can still drink. Okay, so that's sort of the starting point when you leave rehab, in terms of what are you really thinking, and let's reflect on that. Also talk about medication-assisted treatment, things like naltrexone, Suboxone. What role do they play? We know that they can be very helpful, but we also know that the adherence rate tends to be fairly low. If you take it, it works. If you take naltrexone, it can help with cravings, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't follow up, just like only about 50% of diabetics follow the doctor's advice and take their medications. 50% of people who have hypertension and high cholesterol. So we have to look at the role of medication-assisted treatment, the role of thinking. Then it also talks about lifestyle change. A big part of recovery is how are you going to change not only your thinking, but if you're convinced that you really need to pursue abstinence, then how are you going to change your lifestyle? Because that's very critical. Okay, how are you going to deal with emotions that would have triggered drinking or using in the past? So those are all aspects of what has to follow rehab. It's kind of like that journey over open water. And if you don't have sort of a guidebook, if you will, or what sailors use to chart to use, it's easy for you to get lost at sea.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm a big proponent of, having been, I'm a huge proponent of the family system and really looking at how we play a role in the addict's life, right, or the alcoholic's life. Right. I mean, my kids certainly could not come out of rehab and have a beer now. A beer would lead to
correct
14 days of shooting up heroin. So one of the things that I hear a lot of research and a lot of work around with the addiction and the process, but then there's the trauma. Then there's the stuff that got them, that got the brain triggered and got them in that place. So how do you facilitate that in terms of supporting the addict or alcoholic?
Well, first of all, the first thing you mentioned was absolutely true. That's the cognitive aspect, thinking I can really, I haven't, I've completed rehab, I haven't had a drink, or I haven't used in 6 weeks, so I can try one. That's that cognitive dimension. But then there are always, almost always underlying issues that started the whole process that led to addiction. Now, some people do get into addiction just because they like the feeling of being high. Mm-hmm. They just like the feeling of it. They like how it feels to take oxycodone or something like that, and they end up being addicted to it. That's a problem among college students, for example, where there tends to be kind of polysubstance, recreational use. But for an awful lot of people, they got into substance abuse because of some emotional issue. There was a research project by NIAAA that showed that if people who had like just a moderate alcohol problem compared to people who had none, there wasn't any difference in their likelihood to be depressed. But among people who were heavy users, were 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression, almost as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety disorders, PTSD, okay? So certainly we know that there are underlying issues, and that's part of that recovery after rehab, if you will, okay? So once you get sober, that's a good starting point. That's a point of departure. But if you want to be able to, have a safe journey, if you will, across that open water, you need to consider the possibility that you may have what we call a dual diagnosis or a co-occurring disorder that's going to trip you up. That maybe you need to not only stay sober, but you need to deal with your depression, maybe social anxiety. Those things can be killer issues. So I think it's important what you're saying that, and in many ways, that's where the family comes in. that's where loved ones can come in, and they can play a collaborative role with the person who's in the process of recovery, helping them to understand what their other issues might be, helping to facilitate them getting treatment for that, so that maybe going to AA can be sort of the bedrock of staying sober, because if you can't stay sober, you're not going to be able to deal with your depression or anxiety. But then you also have to be able to deal with that. People often do that, and they end up, of course, what people have done for generations. They end up using alcohol or drugs in order to sort of compensate for their mental illness.
Do you think that we're born alcoholic, Dr. Joe?
Excuse me?
Do you think we are born as an alcoholic?
No, I think there's a genetic predisposition, that's for sure. We know that from studies of identical twins, for example. If one identical twin is an alcoholic, there's a 50% chance that their identical sib will also be an alcoholic. So that's higher than the general incidence. But it also tells there's a 50% chance that they be alcoholic. So even though there's more of a risk, you can say someone is born with the genetic risk, but there obviously have to be environmental factors, other factors that contribute to it.
Yeah. So do you mind if I switch gears a little bit?
No.
All right, cool. Talk to me about how alcoholism affected you, or addiction affected you and your family. You said that you had family members that were.
Yeah, I had. I have quite a few family members on both sides of my family tree, mother and father, who had alcohol problems. Some of it was hidden. I had a grandfather who died mysteriously. I think of a liver disease. So no one ever talked about what that exactly was. I have another grandfather that was on my father's side. My mother's father was a coal miner in Pennsylvania, and he drank, pretty much all his life. Had kind of low skill jobs. My grandmother was kind of kept the family together. Have a couple uncles and other relatives who I really saw fall victim to alcoholism. Thank goodness my own parents not so, but other relatives that are close to me. And when I was in college, I did some heavy drinking and discovered a couple things. One is that I could develop a high tolerance, like those in my family. And I began to realize that although people sometimes think that's a blessing, it really isn't. It's a curse that you could develop a high tolerance. I ended up getting sick a couple times, getting drunk in college. Never really got into drugs at all. But I looked around me and I saw what was happening. And I realized I think it must have been my senior year in college or something. I forget the incident. I think it might have been one of those times when I just, I realized that could be me. I looked around, I saw that, that could be me. And I guess it was my epiphany, and I decided that I didn't want to go down that same road that I saw, so many of my family falling victim to.
Yeah. Excellent. Guys, Dr. Joe's on the show. We'll be right back after this. Guys, welcome back to the show. This is Recovery Channel Podcast. My name is Dr. Rob Kelly, the addiction doctor, along with Jennifer Lovely. Dr. Joe Nowinski is on the show today. What a great show. If you just joined us, you missed some great stuff. Got a message from Craig in Chicago. What is, or can you describe alcoholism, and is it somebody who just drinks too much alcohol?
No, it's not somebody who just drinks a lot. It's someone who becomes dependent on it psychologically and physically. They develop a tolerance. They feel uncomfortable if they don't have alcohol in their body. They tend to do things like store it, make sure that they always have a supply. They again experience negative consequences related to the drinking. They could be physical consequences. They could be consequences to their relationship. They could be consequences on the job. So it's not just somebody who drinks. In my book, I describe what's called the drinking substance use spectrum, which goes all the way from low risk use to severe problem use on the other extent. So there are people who are not at the severe end of that spectrum, but neither are at the low risk. They could actually be having a significant problem with alcohol or drugs, but they're not connecting the dots between their drinking or drug use and its consequences. And those consequences are real. And those are the people who need to really step back and give some honest thinking to their substance abuse. As I said at the beginning, recovery after rehab begins with getting honest with yourself. If you really are ambivalent about it, then you need to face that ambivalence, and you need to decide, can I really moderate? The research on moderation is not great. Maybe 10% of people who try to moderate can actually get some handle on their substance use, but that leaves 90% who can't. One study only that followed people for 5 years control. The great majority were still using or just as bad as when they started. And the idea was that they were going to try to control their use. So basically research that looks at people who decide that they're going to control their use as opposed to deciding they're going to abstain, they have the poorest outcome. So it's really important for people to do an honest self-assessment and face up to whatever ambivalence they might have.
And when we look at getting honest with ourselves, one of the things that I think that as successful as AA is around getting people sober, one of the things that it doesn't do, which is why it's there for like aftercare, is ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, is that usually under every alcoholic is a codependent. That's my assertion. I don't need to be right about that, but that's my assertion. And based on, and so inside of the AA community, there's a huge spotlight on getting sober. But then you've got people getting sober and they're still emotionally not sober. Can you talk into that?
Well, in my book, my forthcoming book, I've looked at this for a while. I've reflected on this for many years. Hearing enabling, people say they called me an enabler. People say I suffer from codependence. In my book, it's actually going to be rethought. Enablers don't cause alcoholism or addiction.
No.
It's the addict who creates his or her enabling network. Addicts groom their enablers by using guilt, fear, whatever. They groom their enablers. And codependence really refers to the fact that how addiction affects loved ones and families. Okay? The addict in the family affects the whole family system. You work with families and see how the whole family system. How many times have you heard somebody say, I couldn't bring friends home because of dad's or mom's drinking? Well, that's an aspect of codependence that they have to adjust their whole lifestyle to accommodate the drinker. Families who have to deal with financial problems because of alcohol or drug abuse. That's sort of the codependence that takes place. Now, those people need to look at that, because if they don't look at that, that can sort of poison the well, if you will, for recovery. Somebody who comes home from a rehab expecting, like somebody said to me, expecting a mariachi band on the front porch is likely to be very disappointed, because, one guy told me that He came home from rehab feeling on top of the world, that pink cloud that they talk about. And his adolescent daughter wasn't even home when he got home. She was at a friend's house. She wasn't even there to greet him. And, her absence speaks volumes for how addiction, affects a family. That's a very common experience. So there's a lot of healing that has to go on. And that's where the family can become collaborators in recovery.
So if we look at the alcoholic as a whole, when he's crossed the line into drinking alcoholically, and the children are taken off him, and the wife leaves, and the job goes, why can't he just stop drinking? Why can he not just put it down, turn around, and head back home and say, I'm done? What is that drawback every single time?
Well, that's because that's the physiological effect of severe alcohol abuse, severe drug abuse, that there's a craving that causes it. There are also people who just like the feeling. I've talked to many people who say, I know I can't drink. I've talked to people who had 6-7 years of sobriety and then started drinking again for two reasons. One, that ambivalence, that idea, maybe I really can have one or two. And second of all, just the fact that I miss it. I miss the way it feels when I smoke pot or when I drink. Okay. Or they miss the high of cocaine. So there's that craving. So they can't just put it down. That's why recovery involves reaching out to others. You can't do it alone, is one of your ads that flashed across pointed out. No, you really can't do it alone. You're really trying to cross the ocean by yourself if you think you can do this by yourself.
Yeah.
And only pretty crazy people try to do that.
And I would actually argue that whether you're an alcoholic or not, none of us can do it alone. That it's like actually a human condition is that our society supports separate and alone as a way of living life. And it actually doesn't really work. I mean, look at where we are in COVID right now. Separate and alone is not working for us.
Yeah, you're right.
What have you noticed about COVID and addiction and the rates of alcoholism and drug abuse since we've been in this isolation phase?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right, Jennifer, that not only with alcoholism, our culture tends to be enamored of something called radical individualism. This idea that we can all be an island unto ourselves, that we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. We admire people like Thomas Jefferson or Teddy Roosevelt for their individualism. And certainly there's something to be said for, character, for somebody who is willing to tackle their problems and not run away from them. But also, I think you're absolutely right. We also know that everyone, we function better as a family. We function better as a community. Native Americans use something called a talking circle to deal with problems. They don't let somebody deal with it individually. They get a community or a family together and they solve the problem. In Amish culture, no person builds their own barn. It's always a barn raising. And so you're absolutely right that getting through life involves community. And it is very sad when I look at TV and I see these super spreader events, and I think that everyone in that audience feels that they can beat this by themselves, that they don't have to work together. We don't have to be our brother's keeper, so to speak.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. We have a saying here. It's the definition of insanity is not being able to see my own truth. So how can I get well when I'm not even seeing what's happening around me? Hence, I was always the last to know I had an alcohol problem. I was always the last to know I had a drug problem, and so on and so forth. And it just continued. So I've tried it on my own so many times, and it just didn't work because I have a brain that does not tell me the truth. It will lie to me. It will be different this time. It will be, I'll just have one. The amount of times I'm not going to drink that whiskey anymore. I'm just going to have a couple of beers. Well, of course, with my illness, a couple of beers turns to a couple of whiskeys, turns to loss of family and wife. And this disease took everything off me. I went to Oxford University. It took away, in England, it took away my medical license. It took away my children, my wife, my cars, my houses, and eventually took me to homelessness. I was living on the streets for more than 14 months when I was homeless. But one of the reasons why I do what I do today is to kind of bear witness to other people. Like, look, there is life after chronic alcoholism, and there is life after addiction. I mean, there's certain things I have to be aware of today. And I do go to AA meetings, only one a week, because I found that the companionship there is amazing. I was speaking about the same subject together. So I want you to reiterate that there is life after alcoholism, correct, Dr. Joe? There is life after addiction.
Absolutely. And that's where fellowship comes in. Because again, rehab may be the point of departure, but too often people feel that it's a cure. Somebody went into rehab, so they're all better now. No, that's the point of departure for this voyage across open water. There is life. You're absolutely right. You're a living testimony to the fact that there is life. But that's where things like a fellowship comes in, where you listen to people tell their stories like you about what it was like and what it's like now, to see that there is proof that there's life after addiction. Also, for people who know what you're going through. I had somebody recently say that they went to a meeting and somebody says, "Is anybody here sitting on a drink?" And he raised his hand. How helpful that was to be able to say, "I'm dealing with a craving," and have the group, rally around you and give you support. So yeah, there's no question that there is life, and that's where a fellowship. There are other fellowships. There's Women for Sobriety, for example. Based fellowship, and that also is proof that there is life after addiction. But again, the fellowship, like Women for Sobriety, exists for that very purpose, to help women often rediscover the life that they once had.
Yeah. And, I think that one of the things that makes AA so special is that us sharing our stories is an act of generosity. It's an act of being able to really just share our experiences, right? And that is the thing that makes the difference. Anytime that and I think that's the thing that happened in the 30s when AA and Dr. Bob and Bill, when they came together, is they were sharing stories. They were healing people through sharing stories.
It's an act of altruism, as you say. And was sponsored in the very beginning. A sponsor was simply somebody who was sober, who would go to the hospital and take somebody to an AA meeting.
Right.
But that's an act of generosity. It's an act of altruism. Yeah,
absolutely. And today, based on what I've experienced in my own life and what I hear other women experience, is that their AA can be the land of predators. That there is predators inside of AA meetings, and so it becomes unsafe to go to those meetings because of what is there. And you talk about the 13th step. We talk about all sorts of things. And so, what do you tell people that are afraid of that? About AA?
I tell people that they do have to be aware of that. Just like there are people who have bad experiences in psychotherapy. I tell people, if you're going to psychotherapy and you don't think it's helpful, if you think the therapist doesn't like you, then you need to look for another therapist. Okay. Same thing. If you get a sponsor and you feel you're being abused, that get another sponsor. Try another meeting. Yeah. Somebody who has a sexual interest in you and says, "Well, I'll sponsor you." Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they have to be smart about it. And the more they reach out, the more they get this advice, and the safer they are. Okay, but AA is decentralized. Okay, so you don't have to be certified to be a sponsor, for example. You don't have to be licensed. So you have to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people, with your sponsor, as with your counselor, as with your psychologist, psychiatrist, interview them. Most times when I first started to go AA, I thought that I had to pick the first person that came up to me to help me. And because I felt vulnerable and less than, I just wanted to fit in and laugh like these other guys. I took the first sponsor that came along, and it was a bad choice for me. So I always say to guys, this is your life we're talking about. Interview them. See if you like them. And be careful what meetings you go to. I learned one thing in the last 30-something years of being in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's that not everybody in the room is an alcoholic. There are different reasons why we go there, and we just need to be aware, protection, self-care, self-awareness, and protection. Guys, Dr. Joe Nowinski was on the show. We've run out of time again, unfortunately. Dr. Joe, absolutely amazing. As a psychologist myself, I was intrigued with what he had to say. Absolutely beautiful. Hit so many markers. And I want to thank you so much for coming on. Guys, josephNowinski.com is the website. It's at the bottom of the screen. Go and have a visit. Well worth it. Dr. Joe, very, very knowledgeable. Thank you so much indeed.
My pleasure meeting you both.
Yeah, Dr. Joe, thank you so much for this conversation. And what's like one piece of advice you can give anybody out there that's struggling right now and needs support?
Don't go it alone. Okay. Do some honest reflection of where you are with your substance abuse. Can you really control it, or should you pursue abstinence? And then reach out.
Excellent. Great stuff, guys. We'll be right back after this. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. It's the Recovery Channel podcast. Me, Dr. Robb Kelly, the addiction doctor, and Jennifer Lovely. He was a good guy. I like what he had to say. I liked him.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I always find it interesting, people that do research on AA. It's kind of it's an anomaly a little bit, right? There's a lot of things to do research on, but I think that it's an interesting source of subject. But one thing I haven't asked you is, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?
We are doing nothing, would you believe, for the first time since I've been over here. I believe next week on Wednesday, because I arrived on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving, will be the start of my 15th year in the United States of America.
This Wednesday is Thanksgiving.
Yeah, this Wednesday. Yeah, this Wednesday. Oh. Sorry. Yeah, I thought it was Friday. It's this Wednesday, day after tomorrow. 15 years. So we're not doing anything. We're kind of just going to chill out ourselves at home with our dogs and animals, and don't have to do the rushing around and the drive, 4 hours across the state to meet somebody else. So it's good. What about you? Yeah,
same. Totally just chill. I've got a good friend that's going to come over, and she, I have seen her through this whole COVID, so I know she's safe. And so we're just going to be safe and just kind of mellow. It's going to be nice. But I have a question for you. What was the thing that you were most surprised about when you came to the United States of America?
In general, about anything, you mean?
Yeah, anything.
I was surprised how easy you could get drugs off your doctor. Was one of the biggest eye-openers. You see, back in England, now I'm not saying it's not like that now, guys, if you are listening, but back in the day when I was there, you would go to a doctor and humbly sit in front of him while he would give you one of two drugs for that symptom or that whatever you've got. So if you were suffering from depression, there was probably two drugs that he would offer you, and that's it. But you would never go into a doctor's office and ask for anything or try and tell him anything. Now, I know times have changed with the internet and everything, and everyone's all of a sudden overnight a researcher. But that was the day when I came over here. I was, of course, the first year I was trying to, make stuff happen and stuff. So my head's all over the place. So they sent me to the doctor. My girlfriend said, "Hey, let's go to the doctor." And he tried to give me Adderall, which shocked me. And then we went to a couple of doctors and asked for Adderall and Vyvanse, and they gave it to us. And I'm like, wow, especially a psychiatrist. I mean, just back home, a psychiatrist is someone you sit with for an hour and you talk out your stuff. And if you're really going through a bad time, he may prescribe. I went to 6 or 7 psychiatrists over here, didn't even lift the head from the notepad it was writing the prescription for. Didn't even do it. $180 in like literally 6 minutes by the time I walked in and sat down. So that was it. And that was it. And the how everyone's patriotic. I love that. I love the American flag. I love the way everyone flies the flag. Yeah, it was awesome. I still can't listen to the national anthem in America, especially the one that what's her name sang at the football game. I can't remember her name. Without crying. Phenomenal. Yeah.
So they're not patriotic over there in the UK?
Maybe on St. Patrick's Day and maybe a couple of other holidays. St. George's Day, maybe you get a couple of flags outside, but nothing like over here.
Really?
No, nothing like, especially the military. The military over here is a big presence, not so much over there. And I was also shocked of how we, and I say we now, because I'm obviously American, treat our veterans coming back from wars. You know, England doesn't get into wars, you know, ongoing wars, so we can't see it. But I'm surprised how many people I see destitute who have 6 or 7 medals on the chest when they're collecting money from anywhere, or we're doing a benefit for them. And just now, I know we can't take after everybody, can't look after everybody, but kind of just a little bit sad about that.
Yeah, it is. It's heartbreaking just to see that, how we ask so much of them and how little we give back to them.
Yes.
It's fascinating. Yeah, I'm always curious when people come over here what they're like most fascinated by.
It's different. Everything seems to be different, but the weather was a big, because I've always been in Texas. So the sunshine, see, in England where I was, it's not always sun shining, but the mood of people changes with the weather back home. So most of the time it would be raining, overcast, always cold. And you'd get in an elevator in the morning with people. And I studied this for about 7 or 8 weeks. And when it was raining, people would never speak to each other. They'd get into another elevator. They all look 25 different ways. And they'd, come off it with their umbrellas and the coat. But when it was sunny, all the conversations started in the elevators. Everyone was in a good mood. So when I came here, I was like, oh my God, I woke up in a great mood every single morning. Yeah. And then of course I wanted to open all the blinds and the curtains, and my girlfriend then said, you can't do that, it's too hot. And within like 2 hours it was like 150 inside the house. So we had to close the blinds and everything. But yeah, just like a different world. I could never go back to live in England now, never. I love to visit, love my family over there, but no, this is the place for me. And maybe I got lucky. I don't know. Texas has been America as a whole has been very good to me. I don't know why, but it has.
Yeah. So I had some friends from London living here. Actually, they were from Essex, actually. And he got a DUI in a like McDonald's drive-through, like totally passed out, was just knackered in the drive, got thrown into jail, got made fun of profusely because of his accident, right? He got out of there and he was like, lovely, I have to get out of this place. He's like, they're going to make me go to classes and AA meetings and all of these things. He's like, they don't have that in England, fuck that. So he left.
The other thing as well about America is everybody needs licenses to do anything.
Yeah.
Like haircut. You need a license to hair. What? You need to go to beauty school. I'm like, what do you mean? What? You need to go to bar school. If you're going to be a barman, you need to go to bar school. What? Everything needs a license. I think it's part of the money and safety, but not so much in England. You want to be a bar staff in England? Well, just jump in and do it. You want to cut hair? Just learn how to cut it, It's crazy. But over here, everything's to do with a license. Well,
we monetize everything over here.
Yes. Yeah, they do. Yeah. And sometimes there's a beneficial side of that. I get loads of people calling me up now and saying, and I'm talking master's levels and PhD levels, psychiatrists, counselors, psychologists, saying, hey, I'm dipping my license. It's costing me $2,000 a year for all my licenses. I never use it. I can't cross states. I'm going to become a coach. And they drop all the license fees. And I've lost count how many people have done that. Yeah. Crazy.
Well, the other thing about being a coach is that you can, and I'm not saying that in therapy you can't do this either, but in coaching, you're really able to move the patient, the client forward.
Yes.
Different way than you are in therapy. You spend so much time in the past, where in coaching you can really move that client forward. So that's what's super cool too.
I know. And the language that they use, different language for counseling. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I know when I had to take loads of stuff, loads of hours for my psychology license in Texas. It's like Oklahoma. Oh, you've already got one in England. No problem. So just send it off. It'll be a day. California. Oh, no problem. We just swap it over. Texas. Oh, you need to do another 65 hours. Then you need to do this. It was just like crazy. It was just like, I don't know. They made you jump through hoops for everything. And
yeah,
I don't know, man. But it's good. It's good for your own safety, I guess. But yeah.
It's always interesting to hear the differences between the countries, because there's positives in England and there's positives in the US and there's positives in France and there's all sorts of, different places. There are pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. Listen, guys, 2 apologies to make for you. First of all, I'm sorry you only caught the show for the last 40 minutes. I missed 5 minutes off where there's so much to do backstage here when I'm trying to do stuff. I should get a producer in. Forgot to press live record. So we are missing 7 minutes off the beginning, but nothing we can get into. Secondly, we're supposed to be doing 2 today. We can only do 1 show. So keep your eyes and your ears open. Follow us on Podbean. You know where we are, Recovery Channel Podcast. And
Yes.
all social medias, I've got tongue tied. Recoverycoaching.com is where you want to go. And you find us both there, as well as all the platforms. But for me, it was a great show. And I want to say thank you so much indeed for joining us. Thank you from Chicago who sent the question in. And from me, guys, I'll see you next week.
And I'll see you next week. Actually, don't we see everybody on Wednesday?
Yes, I think we do. Yes.
We do.
Yes.
Something to be grateful for. Our beautiful faces will be showing up on your live Facebook. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Bye.